Introduction, Remy Drabkin is a leader and innovator bridging policy, environmental activism, and social justice. As McMinnville, Oregon's first female, Jewish, and queer-identified mayor, she redefined local government by championing inclusive housing solutions and dismantling inequitable code and policy. So we welcome her today. Welcome.
Thank you. I've never been to a congregation that claps before. I'm into it. It's lovely to see all of your faces this morning, so many familiar faces. Today I am going to talk about some inequities in our community and one specific project that I'm excited to see move forward that starts to address some of them. And that is the Northwest Rubber Site. That might seem like a weird topic, but I'll get to it eventually, and I think it'll make sense by the time I get there. When I'm honored to speak to a community or a congregation, I always try to learn a little bit more about my audience before I come in with that opportunity so that I can tailor my remarks to your interests. And when I started my exploration of Unitarian Universalism, I realized I could be a Unitarian And it was because of the 7 principles. And so I'm going to recite those now. And if I get them wrong, please let me know. But they are: 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person; justice, equity, and compassion in human relations; acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations; a free and responsible search for truth and meaning; the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large; the goal of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all; and respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. I share those values with you, both in how I choose to live my own life, but also in how I choose to govern. And as I mentioned today, I'm going to be talking about some city-related things, and I don't want to presume that you know or don't know what I'm talking about. So if I'm not giving the right amount of context, please tell me. I'm at a point where it's a little hard for me to tell how important the context is around some of these projects. So that is to say, I invite conversation today. I'm going to start by telling you a little about me. I'm a McMinnville kid, born and raised. My mom worked at Nick's Italian Cafe and the International Pinot Noir Celebration. My dad was an attorney. And we were one of just a very few Jewish families in McMinnville. I had older siblings, and my brother loved to drag me around 3rd Street after school, drop me off at the restaurant, go to Aunt Aggie's, take me to Turkey Rama or the swimming pool. I loved licking the green stamps from Food for Less. Basically, I had a very happy childhood. And I struggled tremendously in elementary school. By the time I was in 3rd grade, I couldn't read. And my parents ended up taking me out of our schools and putting me in a small school. And that school didn't only teach me to read, they really taught me how to learn. So as an example, when you were studying plants in science class, as a 5th grader, your job was to go outside and look around on the property, choose a plant, not pick it, of course, but choose a plant, and then draw it and write a poem about it, and then learn its scientific name, and then learn the history of that plant and where it grows, and come back and then have to present all of that and memorize your poem and present it to your classmates. So really, they taught me to think about things from every side imaginable, and especially the sides that you haven't yet imagined. And when I returned to McMinnville High School, I blazed through. I finished in 3 years with honors, and then I tried to go to college because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. And again, that took me 11 years to do, and I'm excited that I got to do that. And 11 years of going to school part-time was, challenging. And by the time I completed my degree at Linfield College, 98 to 2009 were my years there, it was 3 years after I had started my own business. And all of my struggles with traditional education were probably due to undiagnosed ADHD, which can make my brain work very well, but sometimes differently than people anticipate it working. And all of that about my education is to say that my mom was, quite frankly, shocked when I called her to tell her that I'd been accepted into a mayoral fellowship at Harvard Graduate School of Design. And quite frankly, so was I. My speech today could have been titled, "I saw the opportunity, I went for it, and I got it," which is the short story of a lot of my successes with the city, and it's how I got into Harvard the first time. I actually really struggled with that decision to apply, not only because it was highly unlikely that I would get it, but also because the application involved me pitching a real project in the city of McMinnville. And for the mayors that were accepted into the project, you brought 2 staff members along with you. And I simply couldn't imagine adding anything to staff's workload at the city. Not on something that was for the city, but that was also for me individually. One Saturday, I took our community development director, Heather Richards, to an Oregon State University football game. I'd been invited because I'd been relationship building between the OSU President's Office, the business school, the food and beverage department, McMinnville Economic Development Partnership, and Linfield University and the city's special projects team, and that's a good example of how my brain works. Tying a lot of strings together, creating webs of connectivity. So we're in the car, and I told Heather about the fellowship and that I wanted to use the Northwest Rubber site on Alpine. That's where I'm going to check in. Do you all know what I'm talking about when I say that? Yes and no's.
No.
Do you all know Alpine Avenue?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So on Alpine Avenue, there was a rubber plant. Do you know what I'm talking about now? Big blue industrial buildings. 8th Street, Alpine Avenue. Mac Market, grain station. Little daycare right here. Big blue buildings behind it. Are we all there now? That's the Northwest Rubber site. Okay. So I wanted to use that as my project. And knowing that that specific project would mean that she, our community development director, would obviously be one of the staff members that I would want to attend the Harvard program with me. And so I told her all of this, and I told her that I didn't want to add additional strain. And Heather said to me, you know, we all went into planning because we want to help build great cities and great communities. And sometimes we just get stuck in the grind. And a project like this would be inspirational for my entire department. Well, honestly, the application had been finished for weeks, and I went home and I pressed send. The acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. So the Just City Mayoral Fellowship is a collaboration between the Just City Lab at Harvard Graduate School of Design and the Mayor's Institute on City Design as part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. It's a mouthful, I know. But the premise is that the mayor is the chief architect of their city, and by teaching and equipping mayors with history and methodologies related to urban planning and public policy, basically providing a tool chest, it's possible to build more just and equitable cities. And certainly in my 14 years of service with the city of McMinnville, I experienced firsthand the variety of constraints and inequities built into its systems. Some neighborhoods are lacking sidewalks and finished streets, and the city's system requires property owners, including low-income families, to pay for sidewalk improvements and repairs. It was starting to work on changing that. Some neighborhoods lack access to parks or don't have urban forests. The city itself lacks transportation to employment and wayfinding. I clearly saw the lack of representation on our committees and decision-making bodies, and entire neighborhoods that just lack representation, and the lack of socioeconomic diversity, something that I actually brought, although people think I'm quite rich. I'm not. I earn the area median income, AMI. I'm going to call out all of the acronyms that we use today because government has this exclusive language of acronyms, so I'm just going to plug them in, AMI. which made maintaining a full-time volunteer position as mayor a financial burden. And that's an inequity too, that we demand so much with no compensation. Whether that was me serving as mayor, or you, where you're serving with the city, or any of the 1,000 volunteers that it takes to make the city tick. We shouldn't be expected to have to give more than our time. The city as a whole, the community as a whole, lacks McMinnville, meaning lacks low and median income housing. Many areas lack multifamily housing, which is by historical design. Exclusionary codes have been riddled through the city's policy infrastructure, limiting what kind of housing can be built and who can own it, although significantly less so now. But the multicultural history of our area, including Indigenous, Latinx, and Chinese communities, has largely gone unrecognized and erased. For those families for those familiar with their McMinnville history, it was 300 Chinese workers that dug the 4-mile water channel for the grist mill that we were taught was built by William T. Newby. Chinese land and business ownership was prohibited in McMinnville until 1964. Many deeds still have racial exclusions on them. And the inequities inside the city as an organization included lacking sufficient funding to fully staff our departments and give them sufficient operating budgets. The city also has limited access to data based on antiquated systems. Try to stop leaning over here a little bit. Based on antiquated systems. So an example is that the budget committee in this last year approved new financial software. That means the city budget, the $159 million city budget, will no longer be maintained through an Excel spreadsheet. And those are all inequities. I mentioned all those inequities without specifically mentioning, nepotism or apathy or resistance to change. So although my administration and staff at the city were eager to modernize and move towards database decision-making, as in any community, there are always subsets that will resist change. I have a question. What inequities do you see in McMinnville? And call some out. Anybody have homelessness, absolutely.
Racial inequities in terms of people who live here of different.
Racial inequities for those amongst the community, yeah.
Low and median income housing.
Lack of low and median income housing, absolutely.
Safe walking and biking routes.
Safe walking and biking routes. Yeah. Lack of public transportation. Yeah.
Requiring digital portals for essential services that don't recognize that some people do not have a computer and older people have problems accessing their medical records, etc. That is definitely not fair.
Yeah, demanding access to the internet and ability to navigate it. Yeah.
Are we losing our younger people?
Are we losing our younger people? That's a whole conversation. We'll come back to that. There is a population loss in the state of Oregon. I don't know exactly the age ranges in that, so I'm not prepared to fully answer that question. I'm going to call out one other before I go on, which is our lack of childcare in the city. Access to childcare is a major impact. Okay, so we have a lot of inequities. We know that. That's true for the world. There was also an opportunity to improve and to fix McMinnville. And by that, I mean to recode the infrastructure for better social outcomes. So I like to ask the question, how we can center justice in our decision making. I also like to ask the question of how do you make decisions that don't cause harm, which in some ways is a different way of framing the same question. So I started addressing these inequities as soon as I was on council and on mayor. And when I say I mean me and the team of people that I was so lucky to work with. And we had a ton of successes. I'm going to call out a few. We established the McMinnville Affordable Housing Commission, MAHC, and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee, the DEIAC. The city now communicates in Spanish and English. We now advertise for committee persons. We don't just ask the person already in the position if they would like to have it again. We advertise on multiple platforms and in multiple language, and we interview everyone that applies for those committees and positions. We added a youth position to all of our committees. We started changing housing codes that limited those things, like where multifamily houses could be built. For a while, duplexes could only be built on corners. Why? That's not true anymore. We incentivized affordable housing production through things like priority processing. You're going to build affordable housing, you're only going to build for-profit housing, you get to go first. Things like that. SDC waivers, parking variances. We worked on successful bipartisan housing legislation with our state representative. We forged a partnership with the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. We built the city's first 7-day-a-week low-barrier emergency shelter. It's the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Why are these successful? Well, despite many frustrations, we do now have a shelter that is open nightly. We have higher volumes of applications than ever before for committees, and a policy that won't allow practices to revert. The right and conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. We created income-restricted housing in a private development, a model for future development and policy. And right now, 175 units of affordable housing are being built next to the hospital with a modified design for indoor and outdoor community space for tribal gatherings. When I say, and examples of how, I was about to explain something that then I saw I explain in the next paragraph. And examples of how changing codes can impact community wellness. If you're familiar with the apartment fire that was on Baker a couple of years ago next to St. Vincent de Paul, when that apartment building burnt down, it was 17 units. It was rebuilt in the exact same footprint, same height as 24 capital A affordable apartments, all because we made changes in the code at the city. When I say capital A affordable, I mean what's called out in state statute as being affordable, which means that if you're in capital A affordable housing, then you're in subsidized housing. So it's housing targeted those earning 80% of AMI or less. And one other success, the Affordable Housing Committee created a funding stream and an independent fund in the city budget that is focused on affordable housing. And the first 6 years of the MAHC, and I chaired that committee for the first 8 years, we operated with a $0 budget, and then we almost got some money, and then pandemic, and it went away. Now there is a permanent funding stream. And there will be dollars to budget this year and efforts beyond an affordable housing position, beyond a person. And I look forward to hearing the recommendations that come forward because they should be wonderful and impactful. But I think it's important to talk about that money because our budgets in government, and quite frankly, our budgets at home demonstrate our values, right? What charities do you donate to? They're the ones that align with the things you care about, right? Or that you think are good, whether or not they're personally important to you. And that's true of the city budget as well, where the money is designated to be spent outlines community values. It's not just about rates of pay and staffing levels, although those things are very important. It's how many hours the library is going to be open and how many days of court there will be. How often do you want your leaves picked up or your streets repaired? How many police officers does the community need? Is the equipment up to date? Do tools still work? How do we invest in our future and maintain our current infrastructure? And that brings us to the Northwest Rubber Site. The city bought the rubber site after the business closed down there. The site had been envisioned as a catalyst for the urban renewal area in the Northeast Gateway Plan. Now that visioning was done in the years leading up to 2011, and by the McMinnville Urban Renewal Advisory Committee, MURAC. The thing about urban renewal is that it's often synonymous with displacing low-income families and businesses. And so my project was to redesign the process for a more just outcome. I like to call this recoding too, even if an actual code isn't being changed. When the way something is done changes, it changes the outcome. I call that recoding. That's what I think we need to do, recode our society. So I started learning about the infrastructure and demographics of the project site and the census block through my fellowship. McMinnville's Northeast Gateway District is historically industrial and is a diverse neighborhood with the highest population of Latinx and Indigenous residents in the city. It also has the highest vacancy rates, the lowest rates of owner occupancy. The entire census block has no parks or plazas. It has lower educational attainment. In fact, 17% lower high school graduation rates in that census block than the rest of the city. There's higher rates of exposure to industrial pollutants. There are more low-income earners in the area and fewer high-income earners in the area. 25% of the children in that census block that are under the age of 18 live below the poverty level. And there's more people with a physical disability in the census block. 39% report a disability. And that's in a neighborhood that exists where many streets are still made of gravel, and there are blocks and blocks and blocks that exist without sidewalks. And of course, as we all know, there's no parking in the district. So could this project fix all of those problems? No, of course not. But it was an opportunity to use data-based and community-informed decision-making, unlike any in the city's history, to create a values-based request for qualifications, RFQ, process, which would change the outcome of the project. The Northwest Rubber Site redevelopment will have a multi-generational impact on the citizens of McMinnville. The fellowship included dedicated research and repeated SWOT analysis, that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, for the site itself, the census block, and the city as a whole. We looked at the infrastructure, the demographics, area investments, historic investments, and by putting all that information together, it made a case for what the top requirements needed to be in that RFQ. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And I had to advocate for those data-based process changes. A lot, actually. I had to advocate for them on the subcommittee, and that meant being courageous. In fact, that's often what I would tell myself before I had to go into a meeting that I knew would be contentious. Just have to be courageous. And it's hard when community members are telling you and others that you're threatening a city process, or you're going to cost taxpayers money, or you're going to bankrupt the city with DEI, when you know that's not true. This development could mean an investment in McMinnville in the low 9 figures. Just let that resonate for a second. The low 9 figures. Right. So unmasking the area challenges and history isn't going to stop that. In fact, it's going to make it a more informed design that will better serve our community. And it simply didn't cost more money to do it this way. It did not add cost to our consultant bill, which was established before any of my research or recommended changes. And through the process, I remained courageous, which of course I did. That is one of the city of McMinnville's stated values. Courage, accountability, stewardship, and equity. The subcommittee and MURAC approved the RFQ with only one dissenting vote. And a boiled down and digestible amount of my research, as opposed to the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages that we produced, was attached to the RFQ. And here are a few things that were now demanded on the site. Mixed income housing, allowing for open and accessible space. Inclusion of the area's multicultural past and present by working with culturally specific community organizations, and an increase in community engagement to inform the development of the site. And mixed residential and commercial, that had been detailed since 2011. That stayed an important and top priority for the site. Did any of you attend the design charrette? Bummer, okay. Well, the design charrette was a direct result of my work on this fellowship. A design charrette is an inclusive process that aims at bringing together diverse stakeholders. So community members, plus your designers and your planners and your policymakers. And you bring these minds together to look at one specific problem and try to create solutions for it. This particular one, and the first and only one the city has had to date, was wildly successful. And when I say that, I say it was wildly successful both because of the tremendous number of people that showed up, including tons of area residents and area business owners. The owner of the daycare center, for instance, was there and spoke with each of the development teams. The neighbors that lived directly across the street, one of the few remaining residential homes, were there and talking to the developers. And part of the reason everyone was there was because we did build capacity in our communications in order to engage more community members. That meant the planning staff walked that neighborhood and they put out 600 door hangers inviting people. And I wrote a personalized letter that we sent to 1,000 people directly in the area. One woman walked in and she said, "Oh, I thought you wrote that to me." I said, "Well, I did." 999 of your neighbors. And so these things didn't cost more money. We just had to decide how to budget for them as opposed to other types of advertising. We also did all the traditional stuff. Then we had follow-up interviews with each of the development teams. And I'm so scared that I'm talking too much boring city stuff, but I also think this is important to show why doing this one little thing carried so much. So even this part where we had a design charrette and then follow-up interviews, that's entirely different than any process that's been done in the past. In the past, we would have put out an RFQ, which is a request for qualifications, or an RFP, which is a request for a proposal. Either way, we would have got, however many submissions we got, we would have taken one, and that would have been what we had gone with. So the fact that we put out an RFQ, we were asking people not to send us, "This is what I'm going to build you," but to tell us why I'm a good partner with the community of McMinnville, and this is how I can demonstrate that. That was a little different. And then asking them to do this design charrette and limiting, going from, instead of just choosing one, we chose 3 to move forward. And then did this other step of community engagement, and then did interviews, and now they're working on their project. So we built a lot in there so that those teams could really hear about McMinnville's needs and community member needs. We got more requests for this RFQ than any in the city's history. We had 59 requests for this document. We also publicized it heavily, the RFQ itself. Made it visible. I used it as the last call to action in a keynote that I did for the Urban Land Institute for their regional conference. So I had a room full of planners and architects and developers. And I said, "Here's your next project. It's right here in McMinnville, and we want a values-based design." It was great. So I went off script here, so let me try to pull myself back. Okay, so we interviewed each of these development teams. Here's what they told us, all of them. They'd never done anything like this and they loved it. It challenged their teams to think differently about proposals and priorities. It was the first time any had been to a community planning event where they didn't have negative or angry interactions. And each team learned something from the community that they will now be incorporating into their design. And I already gave my example, which is the child care facility, which is so important. So those proposals are due February 14th, Oregon's birthday, as we all know. It's one of the projects that I'm really excited to be able to stay with post-term and see through to at least some further stage. And it will be the largest city center housing development that's ever occurred in McMinnville. And because it will have mixed income housing on the site, the Northwest Rubber Project will be increasing social cohesion through infrastructure, having moved through a system of justice-based decision-making. This process change doesn't leave with me, or it doesn't have to. I did run out of time before getting it organizationalized, but community development intends to repeat the process, and I certainly hope the process stays with the city. Christopher Alexander, who's a highly influential architect, design theorist, and writer, gives us this. When you build a thing, you cannot merely build that thing in isolation, but must also repair the world around it and within it. Respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are part. A lot of people are asking me what I'll do now. Well, I've applied for another fellowship at Harvard GSD. This is called the Loeb Fellowship. That doesn't stand for anything. And it's for people that work in public policy and urban design and who are in a midlife career change and that have at least 10 years of experience, not formal education. The project I pitched is creating federal water districts that attach to affordability requirements for the housing they serve in diverse communities across the nation. It was a project that Congresswoman Salinas asked me to work on before I left office. And I do see housing and water as our two greatest humanitarian challenges going forward. But forward is the only way we have to go. Ever forward, as my friend Emily Howard often says to me, ever forward. And while I'm hurt, and I am hurt that I wasn't reelected, when my work was so prolific for our community, and at no charge. My leadership isn't over. And more importantly, the need for yours is at an all-time high. If you also prescribe to a humanitarian worldview, then it's your time to step in. I'm not stepping away. I need to go build my own infrastructure a little bit so I can better serve my community. And I implore you to apply for city committees and to run for city council and to volunteer on campaigns for candidates that you believe in. And get to know your elected leaders, whether you agree with them or not, and maybe especially if you don't agree with them, so that they have the opportunity to hear your perspective and work with community organizations that exist right now and those that will be especially stretched thin in the years ahead, especially those serving trans and immigrant communities. And be part of the team. Join in on the oars that others are already pulling before you go to find your own. Work together. If we want a world, if we want a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, then the time is now for us to be more unified than probably any of us have experienced in our lifetimes. And in honor of the inspirational Dr. Martin Luther King, and to mark our national holiday that honors his incredible work, I'd like to close with his wise words from his I Have a Dream speech. He reminds us to have justice, equity, and compassion in human relations with these words. We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action. Thank you. Thank you. We'll now take a 2-minute meditation and then we'll have some dialogue after that. I'm going to go ahead and start the meditation. I invite everyone to take a big deep breath in and out, and I'll call us back in 2 minutes.